So sometimes when we have our teachers and they come in or they get their boxes in, open everything up, and then they start to look through things and it just kind of seems like a lot, even after training and so forth. So we thought, there's some teachers that are even saying, well, I don't know where to look in the teacher guide for, the vocabulary or for the materials that I'll need and for the differentiated instruction and things like that. So I thought to go ahead and put together something like this to make sure that teachers really know what's included. It's a lot that's there, and hopefully it all, can assist. So then I'll go a little bit more into how we work with that vocabulary that's inserted into the guide. Okay. So when you open up your teacher's guide pretty early on, maybe 5 sheets in after all of the other background information, you'll get to a page that looks something like this. So it'll talk to us about, the cluster introduction information. What is this particular unit about? This is when this one is for the module. There's a unit version that comes first. So at the beginning of the unit, you'll see that one. And when you look at it, you'll want to, decide at that point, is this what I'm looking for? Is this where my student is? Especially if it's for the intervention aspect. You'll want to find out, am I in the right space? Past that, you'll go to the unit and then you'll look at the unit information that's here, introduction information, and see if that particular unit of the maybe unit and module, I'm mixing them up, of the specific modules that are in the unit. Typically, there are about 9 or so. You want to make sure that you've sort of landed at the right module. So this gives you a great amount of information right here, the cluster overview. And that's where you may decide, well, I'm going to jump ahead and see, if this fits a little bit better. I'm going to jump. Once you get into, so this is the unit here. This is where the objectives will be found for that unit. And this will have all of the vocabulary for every single module. They're all clumped in there together. So as a teacher, you may decide right then, I'm going to go ahead and do my vocabulary cards, and then I'll put something up on the wall. I have a different approach to that with the different learners that I'll show you after this, but depending on your approach, they're all here in case you just want to get ahead of it. If you don't, this is the module. So this is the first module of this particular unit. This one focuses on counting, the basic foundation for learning about numbers and so forth. So again, you'll see the objectives that are covered in this particular module only, the prerequisites, and what vocabulary is specific to this module only. So then, I think this is a workable group here to sort of target in the beginning with our students as to not overwhelm them. When you get into the lesson, you'll start to see right away your pretest. So you'll use that as well to guide, give the pretest right away. I try, if I can, to sit with a student while they're taking the pretest, because if they reach frustration during the pretest, then we already know that that's probably a level that's not great for them, and maybe we need to back up. If they are sitting with it on their own, they may, sit there and get so upset to the point where you can't stop it and give them a different pretest. So if you catch it early on, you can go back probably one level or so, give them a different pretest, and then you'll still have, that cooperation that you're looking for to still see where you need to be. So try that. Those are some of the more important. So we have our unit pretest here. There's always going to be the unit post-test as well. And each module has a module pretest and a module post-test. And those are just to use if you feel they're needed, not mandatory to move forward, but great for data as well. All right, so in regard to those vocabulary words, we have them in bold as soon as the lesson begins. So they're all here in bold every single time that they're mentioned, actually. So depending on the kind of learner that you may have, we have different approaches. So I've grabbed the various kinds of learners that we have in our classrooms, and hopefully by the time we've had them for a good while, we sort of know the best approach to them and where they sort of fall in that type of learner category. So just a few examples. For visual spatial, it's great to have our words illustrated, color-coded by unit, module, or other categories that you might think they may connect well with. Also different fonts, types, and sizes, different shapes for that unit of study. So maybe for the first unit, everything that you're doing with it, you're going to use a specific type of shape, a star. And then maybe the next unit, a heart or something like that, just to make sure that it's connecting for them. For mathematical logical, everything is important to be seen in order. So that may be the situation where you want to do alphabetical order for them on your word wall, or some type of a grid using arrows to show how the addition terms link with how the addition terms would link up. So all together with addition, or I'm trying to think of some of the words. For subtraction, of course, we would have difference. Maybe for when we're comparing numbers, we would have greater than, less than. So then we have arrows sort of branching out to those, or bulleted in a way that shows a certain amount of order with those. For verbal linguistic, this is actually a group that would want to talk about the words as much as possible. And I thought that the Frere model might be a really great example for working with this particular type of group. You know, they're really going to want to dissect the vocabulary, and it'll stick that way. So if it's presented that way to them, and if they're allowed to sort of dig into the words that way, then I think that it would be pretty successful for that group to I would say not just memorize them, but feel comfortable using those terms throughout. For interpersonal, it's often assumed that the interpersonal kids are not really as engaged in certain things as full group classrooms or full groups are within classrooms. Like they're kind of the ones that sit back and are more quiet. For this group, offering them the definitions that they need, the sentences, the images, and allowing them to organize it on their papers in the way that they feel is comfortable for them, not necessarily holding them to any particular format like we would do, or this structure that we would do with mathematical logical, or having them try to connect with the different fonts and colors. They may do their own sort of thing, but they're connecting with it in their own way. Bodykinesthetic, I thought this one was probably the one that I would use most often, I would say. Love doing charades with vocabulary words. So for example, if you have your kids get up together and they are presenting addition, and they lay down and cross over each other in some kind of way, or they present the equal symbol or different shapes and things like that. Like that's always a really fun one. And it seems like even if there are kids that happen to fall into some of these other categories, typically for kids, they often participate when it comes to Bodykinesthetic. So having the words up on the wall, but also making a lot of opportunities to connect with those words are super important, and in the different ways that the kids, connect with them. So just different opportunities is really the way that we want to try to lead with the vocabulary. And then of course, there's the musical rhythmic, which is the reason why we use the songs to connect to the skip counting and things like that. Overall, I would say that word walls are useful and they're needed for math, as well as, reading and language arts spaces. But the thing that we want to make sure that we're doing the most as teachers, paraprofessionals, are modeling the words, modeling the use of the words, and making sure that we're pointing them out when they're needed, requesting, that they respond using some of the terminology. I think these are really great ways to make sure that it actually sticks with our students. So I had some more kind of examples. I didn't want to use up too much of our time with the examples of these particular ones, but are there any that sort of interest you, Karen?
I think, well, all of them interest me, being that we have so many different types of learners here.
Yeah.
I would, yeah, I would be open to just any examples you have to share.
Yeah. So, okay. So when it comes to like the visual spatial, that font, so they say that like kids that even when you get ready to have a test and you take down some of those supportive resources and you say, okay, this is the test now, we want to remove some things and see what the kids can do. When they're in a certain font or a certain format, even if it's that order for that, what was it, mathematical reasoning, there's a part of the memory that remembers exactly how it was in front of them. So if it's something that you can do that can stay in front of them for a while, then by the time you're needing to remove it to assess or to sort of take them to the next level and, challenge whether they are able to proceed without that support, they can still recall it. And that's actually very much the way that the touch points work. So after a while, when we're removing the touch points, then they're still sort of seeing them there and how it was the colors that there were, shown in typically, whether it's like the 2 and it has the green dots or the 3 with the yellow dots, they can sort of like remember that and still see it. So we're kind of counting on that visual memory that they have to support them. So yeah, using different fonts, lots of different colors, but with a certain level of consistency. If we look at, for example, some of the keywords here, before, between, after, it might be good to group these in some kind of way. So even if it was like mixed in with a theme, like it's Halloween time, and every pumpkin had the theme of, or had a grouping of a certain word that compares. So, between, before, after, these words being words that are showing the location of where our numbers can land, that may be a way to group those words together. Row and column, because that's something, row, column, X and Y, sometimes those are some things that we can connect together to make sure that they're really seeing that grouping, and they'll see them together a lot in the work that they'll do, but for them to see it together in the beginning a lot might be helpful to make sure it kind of guides the direction that they're thinking. Let's see. Comparison. I mean, all of those are very similar words. Let's see some of these others. Greater than, less than, increases, jumps. So some of these words like definitely go together. Increases can definitely be categorized with adding, or fewer can be grouped in with decreasing or minus. So just like different ways to group them. And then of course, if we're asking them to demonstrate them with charades, letting them pick the word that they want to use, maybe get together with a partner, decide how they want to do it, and then present to the class. One thing that was recommended though is for the students that are coming up with those Freyer models and the students that are coming up with their own version of their definitions, to help them feel a little bit more ownership with that word wall and connection to the word wall, is to actually putting up some of their work. So if they're creating images, that match the words, putting that up, because there may be other students that can connect with it. But if not any other student, then they feel that they're included in that. Same thing with the alternative definitions. Like if you approve them, if there's a definition that's here, that's fine, you know, but if there's a child version that they've sort of translated that makes more sense to a kid and it makes sense to you and you're okay with that connection, posting that up as well. What else? I think that's kind of the gist of some of the examples that I had for that. In regards to mathematical logical is going to be lots of order. So they say to kind of think about the scientific method when you think about that, really showing the students. So if you are introducing the touch points, or if you're introducing even skip counting, and then you're sort of making that connection to multiplication, you'll definitely want to talk about, you know, jumps. So that being a term here, I believe. Yeah, jumps. Multiples, factors, all of those words that sort of branch off from that, we'll want to include them in the beginning to make sure that they understand that they're linked together. In a sequence that matches the way that you're presenting the information to them. So if for some reason, based on your intervention, that you choose to go sort of in a different direction or different flow than what the curriculum itself is showing, if you skip any areas, then just making sure that you've still connected the words so that they, you know, understand that they're linked. Let's see. It says that visual spatial students visualize what was there and access that mental snapshot to retrieve an answer from their memory files. That's something that I've connected with a lot. Actually, I believe that I'm sort of that kind of learner as well. And I think that's why the fonts, shapes, and so forth are really important there. They say that the students benefit from the word wall when it's color coded by units. Adding these mental snapshots help the students with cementing those concepts. And I would definitely agree with that. Any instances where you're able to use the touch points in the way that we have put them in. Sorry for that noise. Any instances where you can grab these images and make, because that's why we use them with such consistency with TouchMath, is to make sure that the students will remember them. If you see the number 2, it's going to have green dots and so forth. So trying to do that. Let's see. We talked about the Freyer models. I think those are really great, actually, for some of the older kids, for digging in really into a word. And definitely working in groups for that, or at least pairs for that.
Yeah, I like that example we use for models in our language arts classroom. So the students do it.
That's great. That's great. And I know that like I had used it before in language arts. It's not something that I used right away, actually, in math. And when it was kind of like introduced to me, I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense to do it that way. Because, you know, I think the thing is that when it comes to math, we don't exactly think about how impactful that the lack of vocabulary can be until we're trying to go through problems and we're thinking, I just said a word and it doesn't seem like they really understand what I just said. Then you're thinking, how do I go back and make sure that that has a full level of understanding? A lot of vocabulary in math is so abstract that it's really hard to put words to it and examples to it right away without a full blown problem, you know, or a full example, which is something that I know that we don't have the time to provide every time. So it's good to use the unit vocabulary if possible and the module vocabulary if possible, to sort of get ahead of it and start addressing some of the vocabulary in the beginning before they start to see it in the problems and sort of get stuck with any of the directions and things like that. Something else that kind of has come up over time with us considering vocabulary is how vocabulary is differentiates between different schools, actually, sometimes. So greater than, a lot of schools are just fine with saying, more than, and that's fine too. But I think the more universal language would say greater than, because we're then connecting it with the greater than symbol. And that's something that moving forward through math is more what you would see or hear. Sometimes kids don't exactly make that connection with more than or less than or bigger, the bigger number. And I think it's super important that we start saying greater than as soon as possible. And even if we're saying, I'm okay with using the student's language to introduce the new language to them. So if the student is saying, well, this is my bigger number, and then I may say, well, you're right, this is the greater number. I definitely affirm what they say, and then I correct with it. And I just really do that with consistency rather than making a big deal of telling them no, you're going to say this word now, because hopefully over time it becomes more fluid and something that they're naturally doing. But there's a lot of examples like that actually in math. And it just, I think, comes from different ways that we were all taught math and the time frame in which we were introduced to math a long time ago. So I like the vocabulary being here. It sort of puts us in the mind frame of making sure that we're modeling the right words, the right pronunciation, making sure we're giving plenty of examples. With it being toward the beginning of the teacher guide and the lesson, it gives us an idea of to start thinking right away. How can I best show, the word represent, for example, and how can I start talking about that maybe in language arts and in math? And, then by the time we're using it and hearing it within math, then it's already something that they're used to hearing, because, it is something that's pretty abstract in terms of represent. And the student may say, well, what does that mean? It may be a little difficult to be able to explain that without a full example right then, So yeah, I mean, that's some of the ideas, I guess we could say, that we want to keep in mind for the vocabulary that's presented there. Is just really considering the different kinds of learners that we have, that everyone doesn't, in special needs, period, we have to consider everyone doesn't receive information the same way. What are ways that we can really expand on our examples? Some of these words here are choice, compare, expression. What are ways that we can actually show this, not just in math, but so that they get a really big understanding of the words. So if we keep in mind the different ways that students learn and some of the examples that we have here, we might be able to get more clarity throughout the lessons. So did you have any other questions related to this or other?
I don't think so. Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head here. But yeah, I'll check out that YouTube video for musical rhythm.
Oh, I can actually play that now if you're gonna. Did you want to see it now?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Share. Hoping it's coming through. Just one moment. I can get it. Let's see.
There was an alligator.
All right, so this actually would be definitely for your younger group. I'm trying to consider the fact that you have that older group as well. But I can show you some other, or I'll show you one of my favorite videos that kind of connect with that part. I'm trying not to steer you so specifically away from the songs that we sent you, but I'll show you one of my favorites still.
Gator living in the swamp would sneak up on numbers and start to chomp. Whenever two numbers sat on the ground, she'd face the bigger one and gobble it down. When there are two numbers that are the same, the gator changes form and she swaps her name. Because she isn't sure exactly how to dine, she stands right in the middle as an equal sign.